All right, in this video, I'm going to discuss with you a little bit about charcoal. And I'm going to demonstrate drawing different objects in charcoal and how different surfaces are going to be treated a little bit differently. So I do have two different objects. Here I have a little fake pumpkin that's pretty matte, and then I have a glass that's see-through glass, okay? Other things that I have are a charcoal pencil. This one is 2B medium. There are different hardnesses of charcoal. Sometimes the really soft ones, like when you get the 4B and the 6B, they just break a lot. So here I just have the 2B. I also have a carbon stick, which is also charcoal, and this is a little bit smoother charcoal. It doesn't go on the paper as gritty. Another thing I have is a piece of vine charcoal. This is very soft and it's very forgiving. Like you can just kind of wipe it off the surface pretty easily. I have a kneaded eraser. Kneaded erasers are almost like clay in a way. You can mold them. If I get the plastic off, you can mold them into kind of points and stuff like that. So they can be pretty useful when it comes to using them with clay or with charcoal. And then I also have a tortillon. A tortillon is really just a piece of paper that's rolled up and it has a point on it, and it's used for smoothing and blending. So whenever I start drawing an object, I'm always going to start with my softest type of charcoal, which is my vine charcoal. So I have my object in front of me, and I'm going to look at my object, and I'm just going to gesture in my object very quickly. So I'm using very light, quick lines to draw in my pumpkin. I'm not going to get too detailed with everything that I'm drawing. I'm really just kind of getting the basics down here. Now the awesome thing about this vine charcoal is that it's so soft that it can be really forgiving. So say I didn't like that line, I can really just kind of take and like make that line kind of go away. I can erase it too. Now whenever you get to some of the the charcoal pencils, it's a little less forgiving. So it's not going to just like vanish, as quickly. All right, so I have just the general, outline of my pumpkin in. Now, I'm going to first come in here and start to add a little bit of shading. So I do see that there's these stripes on my pumpkin, and then I also see that there's like a little bit of reflections and stuff like that. There's some texture. So I'm going to try to kind of place some of my stripes first to help me with knowing where I need to put in some of my shading and where I need to not put in shading. All right, so I kind of have a little bit more understanding of where stripes are going to be and where they're not going to be. Now I'm going to just put in a little bit more of this vine charcoal, and I can take my tortillon and kind of use the side. Now when I use a tortillon, I never put it with my point down on my paper. I always use the side of it. And so now I'm doing kind of a circular motion, and notice how it just like takes that charcoal and kind of blends it. Now I'm going circular to kind of keep with a little bit of a texture. So I'm even applying my charcoal kind of in a textured way, trying to emphasize some of that texture that I see on my pumpkin. Now over here, I kind of got a little out of my lines, so I can come back and erase up where I have that highlight. So that's the awesome thing about kneaded erasers, is you can kind of smush them into little points, whereas a normal eraser just keeps with its same shape. But this one, I can, if I get the plastic off, I can shape into kind of a tiny little point and kind of get to those like really small areas. So I'm going to continue on. So my first layer of charcoal is really with this vine. Um, I I really don't switch to my charcoal pencil until I get kind of a basic coating of shading down with my vine. Now, my vine can actually just kind of disappear. If I take my hand and go over it, it'll actually kind of just disappear completely. So I do need to eventually switch over to the more compressed charcoal pencil, but I'm just not ready yet. I'm really still trying to develop some of my values before I switch over to the charcoal pencil that's less forgiving. Again, I feel like I kind of messed up a little bit on some of those lighter lines, so I'm going to bring those back. And I'm also going to bring back a highlight. So this is really where we'll look at some like subtractive drawing, where I have some color down and then I erase up some of my highlights. And you can do a combination of additive where you're adding to the surface and subtractive where you're taking away from the surface. All right, so the last thing that I need to do is really look at my stem, trying to put a little bit of value on my stem before I switch to a different type of charcoal. All right, so I have some basics down, but I need to get a little bit more detailed and a little bit more refined. I'm going to come in here now with the charcoal pencil. So you're going to notice a difference. The charcoal pencil has a little bit of grit to it. Sometimes it makes people uncomfortable actually using a charcoal pencil because of how it feels whenever you put the charcoal on the paper. It's very gritty, it's very textured. I'm going to bring in some highlights on my stem because I kind of lost those. So what's different about the charcoal versus pencil? Pencil isn't, you can't lift up as easily. It's not as forgiving as charcoal is. So if I put charcoal down and then I lift up with an eraser, it comes up right away. Whereas graphite has a tendency to stay on the surface a little bit more. So I do feel like charcoal is a little bit more forgiving. However, it's a little bit harder to control. It's a little bit messier. It likes to move on the paper, and that can be a little bit frustrating for some people. So what I'm doing is building up some of the values. What I see on my pumpkin is some darker values on the top here, and then I also see some darker values on the bottom and kind of on the sides. So I'm looking at my object and trying to replicate what I see on my object. So I'm using the charcoal pencil to build up some of those darker values. Now I am going to blend this momentarily with my tortillon, just like I did the vine charcoal. I'm just putting the values down now. So you're going to notice whenever you start to blend that it's not going to blend as easy as that vine charcoal. You're going to have to put a little bit more effort. It stays put a little bit more. All right, so now I'm going to look at some cast shadows. And what I see is just a little bit of a cast shadow all the way around, and then it kind of blends out. And then I can darken it up right underneath my object a little bit. Now it's looking a little rough on the outside, so I'm going to clean up my edge using my kneaded eraser. I'm rotating my paper so I don't take my hand and go over my drawing, because if I do, I'm going to smudge my drawing and mess it up. All right, so there's my pumpkin in charcoal. All right, so the difference between doing something that's kind of solid and matte and something that's like this and shiny is really, it comes with your shading and your lifting up with your eraser. So everything else is going to be the same. I'm still going to start with that vine charcoal. So I'm starting and putting the ellipse in at the top. Remember, a circle, here's a circle, on the top is a circle. When you turn it to its side, it makes an ellipse. And so that's what I'm trying to replicate here. Another thing you need to notice on the object, a rounded object is going to be rounded on the bottom. It's not going to be straight. So it's those little things, really looking at your object and noticing the curves and stuff like that. It's those little things that are really going to bring some realism to your drawing. If you flatten out the bottom, you're flattening out your drawing. So again, I'm just using my vine charcoal to gesture in my object a little bit, so then I can start with adding some values. It's going to be a struggle when you start drawing these ellipses to begin with. I have to a lot of times draw a lot of them until I get the right shape that I want. Even this looks lopsided down here. The awesome thing with vine charcoal is you can erase what you don't want fairly easy. All right, so I have my basics. So I'm going to look at my object. Now I see kind of like a gray, and then I have like highlights and darker areas. I'm actually going to break my vine charcoal, and I'm going to put just a light shade of gray all the way down on my entire object. I'm not really worried about going outside my object because it's eventually going to be cleaned up anyway. All right, and I can take my tortillon and I can kind of blend that in a little bit. What I'm going to be doing here is more subtractive, and then I'm going to be adding. So the basic gray is really just kind of getting a basic value down so I can erase up some harsh highlights that I see. With glass, you have harsh highlights, and so using the subtractive method actually kind of works pretty good. All right, so now I have kind of this hot mess of just a bunch of gray. All right, so I'm going to put this right here so you can see what the harsh highlights I'm talking about. Like here we have something very, very dark here and like another harsh highlight there. Now it's different whenever my harsh highlights kind of switch whenever I put it down. So that's what I need to work on first. I'm going to work on my harsh highlights, and then I can look to see if there's anything that's like darker that I need to kind of make a little bit darker with my charcoal pencil. All right, so I see kind of a harsh highlight over here, so I'm going to shape my eraser, try to get it more into a point. I think these kneaded erasers are pretty old, and so they're not really changing their shape the way I want them to. I probably need to warm it up a little bit more. So I'm going to take and just try to replicate those harsh highlights that I see. I'm going to start on one side and kind of move my way over. I definitely see one here. Now some of them are harsh and then some of them are a little bit lighter. So I need to maybe vary my pressure that I use with my eraser. I also have some highlights that are very thin up here. So I'm going to erase some highlights up there, but maybe fix that up again, going back over it and refining it with the charcoal pencil. And then there's a lot of these random floating. So your highlights change depending on what your light situation is and the object's relation to those. So I have a lot of floating ones right there because I got a lot of different light sources in this room. There is some reflections here at the bottom. I got a light reflection here, but not super harsh. All right, I got a lot of harsh highlights down here, but they're all very, very tiny, and I don't know how I can get them to be so tiny with my eraser. So I'm making them a little bit bigger, and then I can refine it with the use of my charcoal pencil and also my tortillon. All right, so I have this. I just noticed like I really don't like the shape of this out here. I feel like it needs to come out a little bit more, so I'm going to fix that. All right, so now I can come in with a charcoal pencil and see if I have any darker areas that are reflecting. I can refine some of these things, some of these highlights that I put in. Another thing that's going to impact your object that's glass and see-through is what's behind it. So if you have something complicated behind it, it's going to have kind of complicated reflections and everything else. Luckily, I just have this kind of gray table. It's not too complicated for me. I really don't see any dark, harsh areas in here, so I'm really not going to add a whole lot of charcoal pencil in there. Now I can come in and refine some of these highlights that I've done just with my tortillon. It's going to push what's already on my tortillon or what's already on my paper around. Again, I'm not making any of this up. I am trying to replicate what I see in front of me. I'm not very good at making up like shadows and harsh highlights. All right, so my last phase is going to be my cleanup phase, where I come in with my eraser and try to clean up my edges. Another thing I need to do, so I guess this isn't my last phase, I just remembered I really need that cast shadow. It really helps to have a cast shadow to kind of ground my object. All right, so I'm going to start with Vine for my cast shadow. And just kind of have that vine fade out a little bit. And then right underneath my object, I'm going to darken it with my charcoal pencil. And then kind of smooth that out with the tortillon. So when it comes to like a clear glass object, I like to use the subtractive method. Oh no, my charcoal pencil is breaking. Oh, that one broke too. And then the pumpkin is kind of matte. I don't know, I like to use the additive. So depending on my object, they both work though. So you just have to kind of mess around with them and kind of figure out what works best for you.